All right, everyone, welcome back to another Thursday morning and another episode of Seeds of Music, the web's #1 resource for independent artists. I'm your host, Kyle Williams, and this is our weekly web show where I bring on music industry professionals and successful independent musicians to talk about ways to build a bigger fan base and make more money with music. Today's interview is going to be really interesting because on the show today we have D.A. Wallach, who is the artist in residence for Spotify. Now, D.A. is a recording artist and songwriter, and he's toured with artists like N.E.R.D. and Weezer. It's been featured on TV shows, including Jimmy Kimmel Live and Late Night with Jimmy Fallon. He's recorded a couple albums as one half a member of Chester French and is currently recording his first solo album for Harvest Capitol Records. But our main topic for this interview is Spotify. Spotify is one of the most recognizable music streaming services next to Pandora. And it's been in the news a lot because, let's say, artist royalty rates, payouts. Do artists really actually make fair amount of money from the royalties paid out from Spotify? So instead of taking to random blogs and internet forums, I decided that I should reach out to someone who works within Spotify that can come on the show and help clarify exactly what Spotify is and how it compensates artists. So if you love using Spotify as a listener, or maybe you have some music up on there, or maybe you don't have music up on there and you're just trying to figure out if it's even worth it to have your music available to be streamed on Spotify, then this is definitely an interview that you want to listen to front and back. So let's jump right in. All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of Seeds of Music. On today's episode, it's pretty exciting. We have D.A. Wallach. He is the artist in residence at Spotify, and I've been really anxious to talk with you, D.A., for quite some time because, let's just face it, Spotify is like a centerpiece in this big discussion on online streaming, music consumption, and artist royalty rates and payouts. So I just want to say thanks, man, for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I know you got a lot of things lined up, so I'm just gonna throw some rapid questions at you. Hope that's cool.
Yeah.
First thing I'm curious is, how exactly did you get involved with Spotify specifically? I mean, you're a musician first, one half of Chester French. How did that evolve for you?
Well, I had several years ago been just a massive music collector. I was one of these people who had hard drives upon hard drives of music. And when I heard that Spotify existed, I was just super excited.
Yeah.
As someone who liked collecting.
Yeah.
At that time, the service was only really available in Europe and had become very popular in Sweden. And so I was able to get an account from a friend who was able to let me borrow his login. And I just fell completely in love with it. And it sort of changed my life. Before I even thought about the business in any way, it really just changed my life as a listener and a fan of music and an artist.
Yeah.
I was so sort of obsessed with this and so convinced that it was the way that the industry would ultimately move, that I just had to somehow be involved in making it happen. And so I got to know Daniel Ek, who started the company, and some of the other early employees. And we developed a friendship and started talking a lot about how Spotify could enter the U.S.
Yeah.
And also how through that we could start to build a closer relationship with the creative community. Yeah. And so for the past several years, what I've done has been to act as a bridge between Spotify and artists. Obviously, we can't personally talk to everybody, but we try our best to be pretty open to folks who want to meet us. That was how we met, in fact. So,
yeah, that's true.
Glad to be here.
So, my next question here is it's like a hot button topic here.
Yeah.
And obviously, when it comes to artists, what's the biggest thing we're lacking besides like people listening to our music? It's money. It's the income that we bring in, and I feel like there's a lot of back and forth about how Spotify works. So I just wanted to clear this up with you for every musician who's listening to this show, and hopefully every musician who in existence can get this cleared up for them as well. So Spotify pays out approximately 70% of its total income to the rights holders. But a lot of artists feel like Spotify doesn't fairly compensate them. So how does How does that actually work out?
Yeah, so you're totally right about the sort of big 70% number. The way it works is Spotify earns money in two different ways. We have a paid subscription service where people pay us $10 a month to get unlimited access to music. So we take their $120 a year and we pay out 70% of it in royalties to the people whose music they listen to.
Yeah.
So we look, every month at all of the stuff that's been consumed on the service, and then we split that 70% of what we've taken in royalties, and we give you, if you were 1% of what people listen to on Spotify, you're going to get 1% of those royalties. The other way we make money is by selling advertising. And so people who use what we call our free service, but which is really like a much more limited version of what you get with a subscription, is they pay for their consumption by viewing advertisements, just in the same way that people pay for network television or when they listen to the radio. And we similarly take the income from those advertisers and put it into this royalty pool that contributes to these total payouts.
Yeah. Based off popularity, right?
Well, and just to be clear, it's sort of, it's a direct relationship between how much people listen to you. So it's not like we pay bigger artists more because they're bigger artists.
Yeah.
A listen to my music is worth just the same to Spotify as a listen to Taylor Swift's music or Bono's music.
Yeah.
So we really pride ourselves on dividing the money fairly, purely on the basis of how much people have listened to it. And the other thing that I'll speak to quickly is something that you hinted at, which is that we pay whoever owns the music.
Yeah.
And so for artists who own their own music, I am an artist who some of my music is owned by a label and some of it I own myself. Depending on who owns the music, that is how we get it. They license it to us.
Yeah.
And so we have agreements with the major labels, but we also have agreements with thousands of smaller labels and also with distributing services like TuneCore or CD Baby. If you are an artist like me who most recently distributed something through TuneCore, Spotify pays TuneCore, TuneCore pays me, and TuneCore takes no cut. On the other hand, I used to be signed to Interscope Records, so when Spotify pays out royalties for that music, they pay it to Interscope, they pay it to me as the owner of the publishing, they pay it to ASCAP, which is my performing rights society, and all of these different intermediaries pay it on to me in accordance with whatever my agreement with them is. So Interscope spent a lot of money marketing my music. The royalties I've earned have not begun to pay them back for all of that. Yeah. And so I actually don't get any of those royalties passed on to me. All of the money that Interscope takes from my record is going to recoup the advances that they paid me in the past.
Yeah, because they're a business as well. They have to make sure that they're.
Yeah, I may not like aspects of the deal that I did with them, but what I did was I sold them my music, and I gave them the right to figure out ways to make money from that music.
Yeah.
And according to our agreement, they only are obligated to pay me once they've recouped all of the money that they spent, which they've not done yet. So in theory, once that happens in the future, we will then split the royalties that Spotify pays them according to the provisions of our contract.
Yeah. So what do you think the the idea that Spotify is not fairly compensating artists? What is the concept of fair? Because it seems like Spotify brings in more money, moves listeners away from piracy, but all that money has to go through distributors and publishers, and those rely on deals that are outside of Spotify's control and outside of Spotify's responsibility. So where do you think the angst is coming from, or the misconception?
I think let me start by saying that I am intimately familiar with how difficult it is to make money as an artist these days. Mm-hmm. And the reason it's so hard to make money is because most people who listen to music don't pay for music. And that is what the world became like after piracy. and it's the world that Spotify is trying to repair. So our competition is piracy, it's YouTube, and it's all of the other free ways that people listen to music. So what we are really trying to do is convince people that music is something they should pay for again. But to do that, we really have to teach them that a service like Spotify is worth paying for.
Yeah.
And the way we do that is by offering this more limited free version of Spotify. And so the first answer to your question is that I think a lot of people who maybe are paying subscribers of Spotify, as a lot of artists are, people who are really into music like us, we want...
I pay. I've been paying.
So I think a lot of us don't have much experience with Spotify's free version. And I think there's a misconception out there that the free version of Spotify is like this free-for-all where you can go and listen to anything without paying for it. And the reality is that most people using the free version of Spotify use it on their cell phones.
Yeah.
And that version is much more limited. It's much more akin to Pandora or to another limited sort of free radio service. It's very different than our paid service. And so I think a lot of people, artists in particular, are hearing that Spotify's giving away music. And really nothing could be further from the truth. What we're trying to do is give people a taste of what a legal licensed music service can be like. And then we're trying to convince those people to pay us $10 a month to subscribe.
Yeah.
The other two reasons that I think there's a lot of angst out there, I can talk about briefly. One is that, as I said, we don't pay the artist directly. And so there are a lot of steps in between the checks that we write and the artist's bank account. And unfortunately, we don't control all of those steps. And so as an artist, unfortunately, if you want to track down all the money that Spotify's paying out for your music, you have to look to a lot of different partners to see how it's arriving. And all of those different partners are paying on different schedules, and they are accounting to you in different formats, and it's extremely confusing. And so I go through this personally in trying to understand how I make money off of music. And I know that other artists are dealing with the same sort of lack of transparency. Yeah. And you're going to see Spotify over the next several months, I think, really try to take the lead in pushing for greater transparency. We've done this a little bit already by offering an analytics tool where artists can log in and see how much their music's being played on the service.
Is that Next Big Sound?
We do it with Next Big Sound, and we offer it for free. So any artist with music on Spotify can email us or go to spotifyartists.com and sign up for this tool. And with that, we really hope to give people a picture of how much their music's being consumed. And then, hopefully that can empower them to try to track down the money that we're paying out for their repertoire. But I think we're going to do a lot more to try and take the lead on this. And then the last thing I would say is that a lot of the complaints that we're getting, there's not really a gentle way to put this, but a lot of the complaints we're getting are from artists who are not super popular on the service. Yeah. So you hear a lot of artists who are just starting out or who have a small band, for example, and maybe are seeing a royalty statement that says, wow, our music got listened to 10,000 times and we only made a few dollars off of it. And their sort of implication is that this is an outrageous undervaluing of their music. The only way I can put it is that because we pay you based on how much people listen to your music, the numbers on Spotify are in a totally different sort of ballpark than they have been traditionally when it comes to sales.
Kind of like trying to imagine the stars in the galaxy or something like that. Because it's my first impression was that Spotify, because of how much revenue it brings in and how large it actually is, because it's it doesn't have as many users as YouTube. YouTube has like 1 billion. Yeah. Spotify has 30 or 40 million. And only some of them are paid subscribers at $9.99 per month for that. And you have drop off, so people who only might not use the service for a whole year, and then you have the fluctuating value of as advertisement dollars. So there's just like a lot of variables in there.
There are a lot of moving pieces, and you're bringing up a great point, which is that Spotify is not that big yet. I mean, I think we because we're pushing streaming music, been the leader, we're perceived as being enormous. But in reality, we have way fewer customers than a service like iTunes does, or certainly than YouTube does. And just to return for a moment to the point I was making about the size of artists on Spotify, we respect everyone's creativity, and we believe every artist should get paid for their work if people consume it. The popular artists on Spotify, to give you just a frame of reference, are generating hundreds of millions of plays in certain cases. And artists at the largest scale are generating payouts of between $4 and $6 million a year from us. So I bring this up because if you are popular on Spotify, and if a lot of people are listening to you, the money is really significant already. We talk a lot about how big we want to be in the future, but even today, popular artists on the service are generating a lot of money. And it doesn't just, it's not just the case with the Taylor Swifts of the world. There are plenty of sort of newer and older bands in all different levels of popularity, for whom Spotify is now a major part of their income. Even for me personally, I'm now at a point where I'm earning more from streaming services, including Spotify, than I am from sales.
So yeah, it seems like it's a scale thing. Like to an artist, to most musicians who feel like they don't have a mind for numbers, and a mind for understanding scale, they'll look at 10,000 plays and think that that's massive. However, when you look at the current income and payout structure of Spotify, also the size of its user base, 10,000 might, not really be the huge number that we think it to be. You need hundreds of thousands or millions of plays. But when you think about how many people you have in your who are aware of your music, who use Spotify and their music consumption habits, then you get into the idea of like, well, if I have a fan base of 5,000, people that listen to like an average of my song 5 times a day, then you have a solid number of like, oh, okay, that's, now I have to think about in terms of how many fans do actually have spread out and use this service. So I think that it's easier, and this is just my opinion, but I think it's easier to just associate, because Spotify is a large company, it's a large tech company, and artists, we don't relate to that, and I think there's this association with the negativity, or the negative association of labels with tech companies, or just companies or just businesses in general. So there's like just a lack of trust that's apparent there, and that's probably the biggest thing.
I think that's true, and we're working really hard. The reason I'm on your show today, and that we try to have meetings with artists in cities. We recently did a tour in the U.S. where we invited artists to come and talk to us and have an open conversation. And we had some folks show up who wanted to shout at us and really voice some powerful discontent. We're happy to listen to everybody, and we view ourselves as depending to a large degree upon the artists who give us their music and put it in the service, make it available to our users. So we never want the artist community to feel taken for granted. No partner is more important to us than the artists who put their music in the service. And we also are really focused on making Spotify the most financially valuable place that you can send a fan. So I think there's this sort of parallel debate that takes place about whether Spotify is costing people album sales. You hear this a lot, and
I don't think it's necessarily true or necessarily not true. I think it needs deeper investigation for sure.
Well, I'll tell you the way that we think about it. Look at someone like Taylor Swift. I think she has about 40 million fans on Facebook, and when she put out this album and it wasn't available on Spotify and other services, she sold so far, I think, over 1 million copies, but approaching a couple million copies. What do we think the other 38 million fans are doing? Do we believe that they're not listening to the album, or do we realistically confront the fact that most of them are going and listening to it, but they're finding it through pirate services, through YouTube, through unpaid streaming services, and elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I think one view says, keep your music off the streaming services, and if people who love those services can't find it, they're going to run to the record store and buy it.
No.
We
I don't think that's going to happen.
There might be a few people like that, but we really think the evidence suggests that the vast majority of those people are going to go and obtain it illegally.
Yeah.
And our hope instead is that artists can really help us convince consumers that music's worth paying for.
Mm-hmm.
The only way we can do that is if, when people try out Spotify, it exceeds their wildest dreams and they fall in love with it, just like I did or like you did.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That depends upon having all the great music that people want in the service.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine you have a favorite TV show, but Time Warner Cable doesn't offer it. It's going to be hard to convince you to subscribe. And similarly, we're in the same boat.
I've got a great example of that. I have a friend who wanted to watch Game of Thrones, but did not have HBO, didn't want to buy the whole HBO package just to watch that one show. And HBO Go wasn't working or wasn't an option for him. So he just went to, Pirate Bay or something to download it, to watch it, because it was literally the only convenient option. Otherwise, he would have just paid if he could get it on, I don't know, have it on Netflix or have it on Hulu. But it's really only offered on HBO Go, and I think you only got HBO. Oh yeah, that was it. You only got HBO Go if you had HBO cable service. Like, you couldn't just get HBO Go, and you couldn't just watch that one show. So he resorted to pirating simply because they made it so hard for him to have convenient access to something that he would have paid for anyway, because it was really good. It was an awesome show. Totally. Same thing with like music, awesome music. And to go back to what you said about hurting album sales, I think most of the time, if an artist is going to put their music on Spotify, that really what it comes down to is giving the convenience to your fans so they can listen to your music whenever they want. And then for those fans who are actually going to purchase an album, it's the artist or the marketing team, or in most cases the artist himself is the marketing team. It's their job to connect with those people who are really huge fans and just have, stay in touch with them through an email list. And when you release that album, send them an email or with a link to your Bandcamp or whatever your distributor is, and then they can purchase the album,
Yeah, and I think, the other thing that I would say is that we believe that sending a fan to Spotify can be just as financially valuable as sending them to iTunes or another store. Mm-hmm. So, if you sell someone a download, for example, for $1.29 or 99 cents, say, you can really think of that as your fan is giving you a down payment for all of the listening that they'll ever do to that piece of music.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a great way of putting it.
And, if that fan is only going to listen to your song one time, then you're making out like a bandit.
Oh, man, that means Led Zeppelin's right holders have earned a ton of money from me over the course of how long. I mean, Zeppelin hasn't always been on Spotify, but I'm just thinking of a few specific songs I have just worn the hell out of. You probably made a ton of money.
That's the point. If you are... if you're Taylor Swift, you're putting out an album, people are obsessed with your music and that your fans are going to listen to it hundreds of times.
Yeah.
You may not earn that money. You're not going to earn that money in one moment like you will selling a download. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you what, over the course of a couple months or 6 months or a year, and then you get into multi-year relationships with a fan who's listening to that song, it's very possible in Spotify to generate much more money for that piece of music than you would have if you just the person a download. So what we're really trying to do is create a service where artists don't feel like they're doing us a favor to put their music in Spotify. They actually feel like, wow, this is the best place for me to send my customers.
Yeah. So it seems like it's a difference between short-term and long-term thinking. Someone pays 99 cents for a track or whatever for an album, and they, for the rest of their life, they can play it however much they want. But with the convenience of streaming it on Spotify, they stream it many, many, many times over the course of a couple of years, and then suddenly the artist makes more income than they would have if they just sold for a single price up front.
Absolutely.
And most people don't think long term.
Well, and look, we're seeing already Cobalt, the publishing company in Europe, announced last week that their royalty income in Europe from Spotify is now higher than their income from iTunes. So what you're going to see over time is more people start using streaming as the way they consume music as opposed to buying downloads. You're going to start seeing streaming income become the most important income stream for artists. Right now, there's all of this debate about whether it can possibly compete with the income that you make from selling music. But again, we have to remember that the vast majority of consumers don't pay for music anymore. They used to. And really what we're trying to do is rebuild an industry. We're trying to make the music industry several times as big as it currently is today. And the only way we can do that is to get a lot of people addicted to paying for music again.
And it seems like a solution's coming from and innovation's coming from the tech end.
I think so. I mean, look, I wish, Kyle, that we could wave a magic wand 5 years ago and have made every single person in the world buy my album on iTunes. Okay? That would have been phenomenal. But the cat was already out of the bag. Most people had already, unfortunately, come to believe that music wasn't worth paying for. And so we're fighting this battle against that misconception now, and it's going to take a while, and it does really require all of the artists in the world and folks like us who are trying to build great technology to collaborate around this.
And I wanted to field you this real quick because you mentioned Taylor Swift a couple times, and I know she's in the media for pulling her music from Spotify, but one of our previous guests on the show is a musician and a label owner named Blake Morgan, and he went on CNN recently to talk about Taylor Swift pulling her music from Spotify, and his comment was, and he's very very big in the media, and he's very upfront about artist royalty rights. He's done work on Capitol Hill for fair pay for radio play, and Pandora has been very active with that. He said that with Taylor Swift, despite being a huge artist, that proves that artists don't need Spotify, but Spotify needs artists. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, as I hope to have conveyed already in our conversation, I believe the future requires a partnership between artists and labels and services like Spotify. And the unfortunate history of the record business is that there has been so much exploitation of creative people by all sorts of folks looking to profit from artists' work. And I think it's a great thing that people like Blake are always keeping their antenna up and trying to look out for artists and trying to make sure that artists are not being taken advantage of by anybody. Unfortunately, I really think that in his CNN interview and elsewhere, Blake is severely misinformed about some of the key facts here, and maybe misrepresenting or at least misunderstanding the economics of the service. So he's spoken to royalty payouts that just do not align with what we know to be the sort of rates that we pay out. And so, Blake was someone who actually came to one of our meetings in New York.
That's awesome.
And he's someone who we are happy to have an ongoing dialogue with. One of the points I want to convey to your audience is that Spotify is not, trying to be the faceless evil empire. I've been part of creating a team of 10 people all around the world that all we do, and most of us are artists ourselves, all we do is talk to artists, invite artists to come and visit our office, welcome open debate and conversation. We don't just want folks to suck up to us and try to get promotion on the service. We really are open to hearing people's ideas about how Spotify can be better, both as a product and as a partner to artists.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to engage in a productive, collaborative partnership with someone like Blake, who seems to have decided that we are evil and sort of irredeemable. And you can't start a conversation with someone who believes that you are innately out to get artists, which I can tell people all day we are not. But it really requires an openness from artists to listen to us too and to engage in an honest conversation.
Yeah, well, the solution is going to lie in conversation, and in any case, no matter where anybody's coming from, if you can get a conversation going, continue it, then everybody can learn little bit more. I mean, when we got on the phone, actually, before we even ran this interview, and I talked with you for quite some time, I think we talked close to an hour, that alone was able to clear up a lot for me by going straight to someone who worked with a company rather than reading different news articles on various different authority blog sites where things can kind of get blurred as well. But I think
I would say, anyone listening who's interested in this conversation about the future of music, just like when it comes to politics, beware of ideologues. The issues that the industry, including Spotify, need to sort out are incredibly complex, and there aren't really easy answers. We're trying to convince an entire global population of music fans to pay for music again, and that's going to involve changing the way royalties are paid, changing the way you earn music from money, likely migrating people from buying individual units of music into paying for access. None of this is easy or simple. And there's a lot of nuance and complexity to the way that we should be looking at it.
And it's influenced by global economics and national level economics as well, because the money that people have and their income is affected by affects how they spend their money, and how they prioritize what's important for them to spend their limited income on, their relationship to money. I mean, it's just so I could just go on and on at all these factors that affect it. And so even a company at Spotify's level, or even for lots of artists who are very intelligent, we still can't see it from every single angle. And I think that in the end, the artists and business and musicians and distributors, the musicians can't do it alone, and the distributors can't do it alone because they're not making the music. So it's just that it's just that kind of the age old thing of people collaborating, people making sure that both parties can move forward. Everyone's fairly compensated, and that's finding even ground is much harder to do than it is to say. So but I want to be respectful of your time, DA. I just want to say thanks again for coming on and tackling all these issues. I hope that anyone that's listened to this will be have a lot of those issues cleared up for them. But also I wanted to say that if you guys want to look at more specific information on how Spotify works, I believe it's spotifyartist.com.
Yep.
Has a lot of more in-depth, detailed information. Also, I know that you also do a lot of occasionally some writing of yourself. What's the best way for anyone listening to stay in touch with you?
Absolutely. I post essays occasionally at dawallach.com. That's dawallach.com. And I have my email address on the website. You're welcome to drop me a line if you have questions or comments or just want to chat.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Well, DA, thanks for coming on again. I'm going to sign us off here.
My pleasure.
Okay.
Thanks.
See you.